y'amaganya y'amivu y'amaraso ubwo abacu bashiraga ibuka inshuti muvandimwe icara unyumve wowe dusangiye aka gahinda k'abacu twabuze tubakunze bishwe bose nta gicumuro ibyo urabizi simbikurusha ngaya amahiri ngiyi imihoro tubura amahoro tubura gihoza umuntu akibaza ibyabaye nta gisubizo azabibonera jya wibuka ibuka ibuka ntukibagirwe na gato ya minsi y'amarira amajoro y'amaganya ya mivu y'amaraso ubwo abacu bashiraga ibuka mfite ubwoba mfite igihunga impamvu yabyo ndayikubwira nuko ndeba benshi muri twe bameze nk'aho barangaye maze bikazavamo kwibagirwa ko byaba ari ishyano se bagenzi byaba ari igihemu ku bacu jya wibuka ibuka ibuka ntukibagirwe na gato ya minsi y'amarira amajoro y'amaganya ya mivu y'amaraso ubwo abacu bashiraga ibuka kwiyibagiza ni ubupfu ntabwo ari ubupfura gakondo ibyacu ni ibindi bishyashya ntabwo namenya aho bituruka turibeshya tukihenda maze tugahunga ukuri tukuzi siyasa twayisize ku mipaka maze dutahana andi matwara ibyo duhugiyemo ni bibi cyane jya wibuka ibuka ibuka ntukibagirwe na gato ya minsi y'amarira amajoro y'amaganya ya mivu y'amaraso ubwo abacu bashiraga ibuka ishyari ni ryinshi dufite itiku turareguzwa turapfa imyanya turacura ibinyoma bivamo impuha ndabona cyaruswa cyotota tutitonze twakiyoboka inda nini dufite yamize imbabazi na ya mfubyi ntituyireba urukundo rwimukiye uburyarya reka turaryana nk'abatava indi imwe mbese twabaye banga mwabo mwoka byaramwe mu gaheka dusubize amaso inyuma gatoya ejo tudacana uwo twazimije tujye twibuka ibuka ibuka ntukibagirwe na gato ya minsi y'amarira amajoro y'amaganya ya mivu y'amaraso ubwo abacu bashiraga ibuka ngo ubuzima ni ukuri burakomeza sinkubwiye kujya mu buriri wiyorose uzahorote, iyo si yo nama nakugira. Ariko rero ibyo ukora byose, aho ujugurika umunsi nijoro ushaka ibintu n'amafaranga, jya ubikora wibuka abagiye, ntugategereze gusa uyu munsi. Kandi rero uhora uzi neza ko burya kutibuka ari ukuzima, maze wibuke. Ibuka, ibuka, ntukibagirwe na gato ya minsi y'amarira, amajoro y'amaganya, ya mivu y'amaraso, umwe abacu bashiraga. Ibuka. Erega kwibuka si icyaha, ntabwo kwibuka ari inzika ihora itekereza guhora, ahubwo kwibuka byangombwa ku munyarwanda ugifite umutima, ni ukuzirikana ubudatuza, ni uguharanira ubutabera, ni uguhiga umugoma aho ari, ngo ayo marorerwa ahere burundu. Tujye twibuka. Ibuka, ibuka, ntukibagirwe na gato ya minsi y'amarira, amajoro y'amaganya, ya mivu y'amaraso, ubwo abacu bashiraga. Ibuka, 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 ibuka.
Honorable Minister of National Unity and Civic Engagement, Dr. Bizimana Jean Damascene, Excellencies, Ambassadors, High Commissioners, and heads of international organizations, officials from the Ministry of National Unity and Civic Engagement, officials from the Ministry of International Cooperation, members of the Diplomatic Corps, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Let me start by welcoming you to Kwibuka's conversation this morning, and thank you for coming. My name is Sandrine Wimbabazi Maziateke, and I will be your MC for today's event. As we start our program this morning, let me request your excellencies to kindly stand so that we observe a minute of silence in memory of more than 1 million victims of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. You may please raise. Thank you. Thank you. You may be seated. This session will be followed in English, French, and Portuguese through simultaneous interpretation. Kindly use channel 1 for English, channel 2 for French, and channel 3 for Portuguese. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this event is co-organized by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation and the Ministry of National Unity and Civic Engagement. The objective of the event is to give diplomats based in Rwanda an opportunity to be the conversation around Kwibuka 28. At this juncture, allow me to take you through the agenda of today. We will start with the opening remarks by Honorable Minister Dr. Bizimana Jean Damascene, Minister of National Unity and Civic Engagement. This will be followed by remarks by His Excellency Mr. Edward F.B. Octavio, the Ambassador of the Republic of Angola, on behalf of the Dean of the Diplomatic Corps. That will bring us to the end of the opening session, moderated by Ms. Shakila Umutoni, Director General for Africa at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. The panel discussion will bring us to the end of our conversation today. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let me invite Honorable Minister of National Unity and Civic Engagement, Dr. Bizimana Jean Damascene, to deliver his keynote address.
Excellences, Mesdames, Messieurs, ambassadeurs, représentants du corps diplomatique et des organisations internationales au Rwanda, bonjour à tous. Et au nom du gouvernement rwandais, je vous adresse mes sincères salutations et vous remercie pour ce moment de participation à cette conférence, ce colloque, qui s'inscrit dans le cadre de la 28e commémoration du génocide perpétré contre les Tutsis en 1994 au Rwanda. Cette conférence a été pensée dans le cadre de la résolution de l'Assemblée générale des Nations unies du 23 décembre 2003, qui a été modifiée le 26 janvier 2018, dans laquelle la date 17 avril chaque année a été consacrée et adoptée par les Nations unies comme une journée internationale de réflexion sur le génocide des Tutsis au Rwanda en 1994. Comme vous le savez bien, le génocide commis contre les Tutsis a été le dernier crime majeur du XXe siècle et il importe donc à la communauté internationale d'y réfléchir en vue de voir les failles et surtout en vue de regarder l'avenir pour nos générations futures.
And to make sure that we draw lessons for the future, draw lessons from that future. And this is why I will be trying to reiterate some facts that will help us, that will guide us in our reflection today. You may probably remember that in 1999, the Secretary General of the United Nations set up a commission under Ingvar Carlsson, former Prime Minister from Sweden, and presented their report on 15th December 1999. That commission pointed out different failures in preventing and prosecuting genocide, and those failures were the responsibility of the United Nations. This is how he said it. The entire United Nations is responsible for having not prevented or put an end to the genocide in Rwanda. That first shortcoming was in terms of not mobilizing resources and the political will that were required by the event in Rwanda and the United Nations presence in that country. The member states persisted in not expressing their required political will, and they refused to act in a resolute manner. End of quote. Excellencies, you may also remember that the African Union also created a commission on 21st November 1997 under former President of Botswana, Sir Katumile Masire. The commission presented its report in 2000 with the title, A Preventable Genocide. Let me quote briefly from that report. The truth from our research is that genocide that occurred in Rwanda could have been prevented by those in the international community who were in a position to do it and had the means to do so. But there was no political will. It's not that they lacked the means, so the world abandoned Rwanda. End of quote. You also remember that reports by some states, such as the Belgium Senate in 1997, and the recent report by the Declared Commission in France, and the Muse Commission report commissioned by the Rwandan government. Those are important reports that revealed several failures and failures to meet some obligations by some states and the international community. And we need to reflect about all that. It's important to have a critical analysis of this last genocide of the 20th century so we can draw lessons for the future, but also to better manage the consequences of the genocide committed in Rwanda. Allow me to reiterate a few facts about which the world could have reflected on and that could have allowed to act to prevent the genocide. In March 1993, an international commission on the violation of human rights in Rwanda, with the International Federation for the Human Rights, and 5 NGOs, and covering that was conducted between 7 and 21st January 1993, which is a year before the genocide. The report pointed out the implication of officials of the government in planning the ethnic massacres. The Commission insisted back then about the risks of a genocide against Tutsis. At the same time, a few years later, 5 months later, rather, 11th August 1993, the Special Rapporteur on extrajudiciary killings, a report by the United Nations Commission on Human Rights, Mr. Barkendiai, presented a report about the gravity of political assassinations by the then government, the gendarmerie, and the pro-government militia. The special rapporteur concluded that the Tutsi population was targeted, and he indicated that ethnic violences in Rwanda showed, quote, very clearly that the victims of these attacks, the Tutsis, the majority of whom were Tutsis, had been targeted solely because of their ethnicity and no other reason. The special rapporteur recommended a number of measures to prevent new massacres. On 11th January 1994, General Dallaire, force commander of the United Nations Assistance Mission to Rwanda, MINUAR, UNAMIR, sent a telegram to the UN headquarters in which he shared information that President Habyarimana's circle was planning the extermination of Tutsis and the assassination of Hutu political opponents. This information revealed that there were 1,700 men in Kigali capable of killing 1,000 Tutsis in 20 minutes in Kigali. That was in January 1994. General Dallaire's telegram mentioned a strategy by the Rwandan regime to provoke the Belgian contingent of the UNAMIR so they would withdraw the full contingent, which was the backbone of the UNAMIR. Finally, the General Dallaire's message indicated the existence of an important arms cache in Kigali capital. General Dallaire informed the UN that he was planning to attack and seize those weapons to abort, to make that plan, ethnic killings, abort. The head of UN keeping, who was the Undersecretary of the UN Secretary General, Kofi Annan, back then, sent a telegram refusing General Dallaire to conduct that operation. So he denied him to attack and seize those weapons. And this was the first of the failures by the United Nations in preventing the genocide in Rwanda. February 3rd, 1994, General Dallaire sent, once again, another Security Council showing that UNAMIR had clear information on the preparations of the genocide. He insisted on the authorization for the UNAMIR to seize those weapons. I quote from that report. We should expect more frequent and violent rallies and manifestations, and more attacks, grenade attacks, and with guns against ethnic groups and political opponents, and more assassinations. And if these arms continue to be distributed, the UNAMIR could find itself in the incapacity to execute its mandate in all of its aspects. So we have many examples like this. This shows that the UN and the international community as a whole had clear information about the preparations for the genocide, and everybody understands that there was negligence in the treatment and analysis of those information to adopt measures to prevent the genocide and save lives. As I move towards the end of my remarks, once the genocide had started, the UN committed another mistake, and as many people know, it reduced the number of its UN contingent here until 270 people from 2,500. And that was following the assassination of the 10 Belgian peacekeepers whom we commemorate every year. And there's a memorial for them at Camp Kigali. The International Commission acted, but it was late with a few positive measures. Once the genocide was committed, the UN realized the gravity of the crime, and they set up a tribunal, the International Tribunal for Rwanda, with its headquarters in Arusha, to try to prosecute different people, the ringleaders of the genocide. We salute that fact and the achievements by that tribunal, even though there were a few shortcomings which contributed to acquitting some of the big fishes and the planners of the genocide, or giving them low sentences. But that tribunal allowed, we need to admit that and emphasize that, it allowed to establish the international acknowledgement of the genocide against the Tutsis, and to get a guilty plea from former Prime Minister Jean Kambanda. He pleaded guilty for his government's responsibility and the country's army in the planning and the execution of the genocide against Tutsis. Without that tribunal, those facts, those truths would never have come about. The tribunal also did something important, because most of the time, defense attorneys continued to deny the existence of the genocide. And in every judgment, the tribunal qualified the massacres against the Tutsis as genocide. And the 16 December 2006, the appeals chamber of the ICTR established that the genocide committed against the Tutsis was a fact, and everybody knew, and its existence is not hidden from anybody. It's a publicly known fact, and at the international level, nobody can refute that. In its decision number 2150 of 16 April 2014, the ICTR established three things. The first is this: to ask the Security Council members and the whole UN to prosecute those who committed their genocide against Tutsis, wherever they may be, and prosecute them wherever they may be, or extradite them to Rwanda. A number of countries met that obligation, and more continues to be done to bring the planners of the genocide to justice in different countries where they are. So they were prosecuted, and others are still being investigated, and we encourage those actions so that those who plan the genocide, wherever they are, may be prosecuted wherever they are or extradited to Rwanda because the Convention about the Genocide provides for that. The Security Council, in the same resolution, condemn every form of denial of the genocide against the Tutsis and invites all member states to have educational programs to instill in future generations the lessons from the genocide in the aim to prevent genocide in the future. So this is this is something we need to reflect on in this session. How do we craft those educational programs and to draw lessons from that genocide, from the genocide against the Tutsis? Third obligation, the Security Council has requested all member states to investigate the facts, to arrest and extradite, following their international obligations, all fugitives suspected of the genocide on their territory, including the leaders of the FDLR. So one of the consequences of the genocide is that the planners of the genocide fled, some of whom fled to neighboring countries, and until today, they are part of terrorist groups that attack the country and terrorize citizens in those countries. So it's an opportunity to reflect on how we can act collectively to prevent those groups from continuing perpetrating crimes that are prosecuted by the international law. And to conclude my remarks, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, now you understand that we have three challenges. The first is the persistence of impunity. We need to reflect on how to prosecute the planners of the genocide when justice is late, when it's not full justice, and this hurts the memory. And sometimes we forget what happened even yesterday, a day ago. So we need to accelerate those trials to put an end to impunity. Second challenge is genocide denial. And this hurts the memory of the genocide. All experts will show that every genocide is followed by denial thereof. The Shoah, the Armenian genocide, the genocide against the Tutsis, there's the same challenge. So how do we act to fight that phenomenon with voting the right laws to fight against denial? Today, YouTube channels by Rwandans abroad are inciting people to racism, to ethnic division, they're inciting people to deny genocide. And they are based in different countries using social media, YouTube. They produce their content in Kinyarwanda. Those countries, in most cases, they don't understand Kinyarwanda, but this is a challenge. Third challenge, how genocide is qualified. Even though the Security Council and the UN General Assembly and the ICTR have established the materiality, the truth, the authenticity of the genocide against the Tutsis, there are still people who refute that reality and they preach the double genocide. They use phrases like Rwandan genocide, etc. So there is a historical truth that has been established, and people are trying to refute that, and we need to reflect on that, and so we can prevent those major crimes in the future. And I think if we don't recognize the authenticity of the facts, it brings bad consequences. So I wish you good deliberations and conversations. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Ministre, pour votre message. And now, I invite His Excellency, Mr. Edward F.B. Octavio, the Ambassador of the Republic of Angola in Rwanda, to deliver his remarks on behalf of the Dean of the Diplomatic Corps.
Honorable Dr. Jean Damascena Bizimana, Ministro da Unidade Nacional e Participação Cívica, Sua Excelência Embaixador Richard Zibera, ex-Ministro dos Negócios Estrangeiros e Cooperação Internacional do Ruanda, Sua Excelência Fodé Ndiaye, Coordenador das Nações Unidas, residente na República do Ruanda, Suas Excelências Embaixadores, palestrantes aqui presentes, nomeadamente Sua Excelência Mats Wolters, Embaixador do Reino da Holanda na República do Ruanda, Sua Excelência Aissatou Aliou Moussa, Alta Comissária da República Federal da Nigéria, na República do Ruanda, e Sua Excelência Antoine Anfaré, Embaixador da França na República do Ruanda, Excelências Embaixadores, Altos Comissários, membros do Corpo Diplomático, minhas senhoras e meus senhores. Bom dia, good morning, bonjour, Mwaramutse.
Good morning, bonjour, Mwaramutse. Allow me, on my behalf, and the diplomats in Rwanda, whom am I representing here at the diplomats meeting, to express our solidarity with the people and the state of Rwanda on the occasion of the commemoration of Kibuka, and to express our humble tribute to the victims of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsis, to comfort the survivors and their families, as well as to dedicate our respect to all those who contributed in stopping genocide and liberating the country. The genocide against Tutsis caused great outrage in the world publicly opinion, not only because of the horror caused by the massacres against the population, but also the destruction of a society that had already achieved peace and was in perspective of achieving full development and national reconstruction, and had caused a negative impact on the economy and the political balance of the region and the continent. Our countries, which we represent here in Rwanda, as ambassadors and high commissioners, are part of a concert of nations, of members of the United Nations and the African Union, which in fact recognize, as what the minister just said before, they recognize the 7th April as an international day of reflection on the genocide against the Tutsis, in which over 1 million people were killed in the course of just 100 days. In that context, the African Union Peace and Security Council is preparing a session in May to approve series of joint activities until the end of June of this year on the prevention of hate ideology, genocide, hate crimes in Africa, in which AU member countries will participate. Kwibuka 28 aim to remember the lives lost, show solidarity with the survivors, and to make sure that this never happens again in Rwanda or elsewhere in Africa and in the world. It also aims to raise awareness about the danger and the consequences of hate speech, genocide, and genocide denial. Kwibuka 28 is also a solemn commitment for the world to come together and say, never again, never again to such horrific human rights violations, and to take the moment to reflect on the post-genocide period that offers opportunity in the face of the challenges facing Rwanda and the ways in which the victories are gained and the progress towards sustainable development. Ladies and gentlemen, since 1994, Rwanda has come a long way in reconciliation, striving to justice and economic progress. We believe that the Rwandan people have understood that time can heal open wounds and empower them to build a future in peace towards economic and social development. The diplomatic corps in Rwanda, being the authorized spokesperson of its states, joins any force undertaken by courageous Rwandans, men and women, under the leadership of His Excellency President Paul Kagame, working for the preservation of peace, seeking forgiveness, accountability, for the community harmony and the strengthening of national unity and reconciliation. Thank you so much.
Muito obrigado. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Ambassador, for your message. We have come to the end of the opening session. And now we are going to enter into the second part of the program this morning, which is a panel discussion. Allow me to invite to the podium Ms. Shakila Umutoni, the panel moderator, to introduce the panel and the panelists. I now hand over to her to lead the next session. Thank you. Ms. Shakila Umutoni, over to you.
Thank you, Sandrine. It's an absolute pleasure for me to be here and moderate this session. Welcome to you all. I know you all have the booklets that contain the program for today, so I really go so quickly in introducing the panelists. And kindly, when I introduce you, make your way to the stage and join me here. So I'll start with His Excellency Ambassador Dr. Richard Sezibera. Ambassador Sezibera is the former Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of the Republic of Rwanda. Welcome, Dr. Sezibera. I will call next on His Excellency Mr. Foden Ndiaye. Foden Ndiaye, he's the UN Resident Coordinator for the Republic of Rwanda. Next, we have His Excellency Mr. Matthijs Walters, the Ambassador of the Kingdom of the Netherlands to the Republic of Rwanda. Welcome, Ambassador. Next, we have Her Excellency Mrs. Aishatu Aliyu Musa, High Commissioner of the Republic of Rwanda, High Commissioner of Nigeria to the Republic of Rwanda. Welcome, Your Excellency. And last but not least, we have His Excellency Mr. Antoine Onfray, l'ambassadeur de la République de la France au Rwanda. Now that all my panelists are here, we will get started. Now, long before the 1994, the world had said never again to genocide. And in 1994, it happened yet again. More than 1 million people were killed in 100 days in Rwanda. Many more instances of mass atrocities have happened around the world after 1994. Irene Kotler, former Attorney General of Canada, said this about the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. What makes this genocide so unspeakable is that it was preventable. No one can say we did not know. We knew, but we did not act. End of quote. So this begs the question, or does the international community never seem to do quite right? Our panel will dive into those issues, but will focus mainly on Rwanda's post-genocide reconstruction journey and the role of the international community in this journey. As the saying goes, if you don't know where you've come from, you don't know where you're going. So we'll make a quick travel back in time so that we understand what led Rwanda to the genocide in the first place, the various actors, the consequences, and most importantly, the lessons learned. To start off our discussion, I'll begin with you, Dr. Sezibera. Can you share with us your views on the road leading to the 1994 genocide against Tutsi in Rwanda? And perhaps you could also touch on the role of the international community. Dr. Sezibera.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, I spent some time in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but I'm not very good at protocol. So why don't I begin by joining myself to the protocol list as read by the representative of the Dean of the Diplomatic Corps. Yeah. And I'm very happy to be here today. Moderate, Rwanda is a very old country. It's certainly much older than many countries in the world. This is a nation that has been in existence at least since the 14th century. So I will not go into the entire history of Rwanda. I'll just summarize what I think the road towards genocide looked like. To To summarize is, of course, to omit, it's to choose, it's to ignore nuance, so you will excuse me, Excellencies, but I will do that. Now, in Rwanda, in the hundreds of years before colonialism, we had a growing nation. But in the history of Rwanda, until then, there is no record whatsoever of conflict between, under the labels Hutu and Tutsi. No, or Twa. In this long history of this nation, there was no conflict under those labels. We had conflicts here. There were episodes of violence in our history. Violence tied to wars of conquest by an expanding state. Sometimes violence led of a defensive nature, with Rwanda defending herself against attacks by foreign states, and sometimes intra-Rwandan violence led to, because of a struggle for power, especially by the monarchy and successors of the monarchy. Those are the types of violence that we had in our country. But we never had violence under the labels Tutsi, Hutu, Twa. This is a 20th century phenomenon, absolutely. So for hundreds of years, Rwandans tried as much as they could to build their country, build a state in a way that they thought that state should be. This process of indigenous growth and state building was, as in many other African countries, interrupted by colonialism. And I will not discuss colonialism in detail also, but let me just make a few points. First of all, point number one is that Rwanda was briefly colonized by Germany, very briefly, and then became a mandate for the League of Nations, and later on a trustee of the United Nations. So this is a country in which the international community cannot walk away. This is a path in a country in which the international community has had a role to play. The entire international community, it's not just one country, a former colonial power, it's the entire international community. All those countries under the League of Nations, and all those members of the UN under which this country was a trustee. The second point is that I wanted to make is that a number of policy decisions taken by the colonial masters, Belgium then, in very close coordination with the Catholic Church, the White Fathers who were here, laid the ground for the genocide that we saw in 1994. And I will just mention one of them. The most important, in my opinion, was the fact that under colonialism, public service was ethnicized. Public service and education, those two were ethnicized. In the late 1920s and 1930s, Belgium, which was exercising the mandate on behalf of the UN, introduced what were called the Mottenham reforms in this country. Those reforms basically decided that public service, the chiefs, the sub-chiefs, all the leaders from the top to the lowest levels of this country would be exercised by the Tutsi. That was a decision, that was the reform that was taken then. The other sectors of our society that had positions of responsibility were then removed from those positions of responsibility. So all the Hutu chiefs, sub-chiefs, and leaders in the villages were removed. And it was only one group that was allowed to be in leadership. These were the reforms introduced at that time. At the same time, education was also predominantly ethnicized, and special schools were set up for children of the leaders of a predominantly one social group, the Tutsi. So the 1920s and 1930s saw this progressive ethnicization of public service and education in this country. And three, this ethnicization was given legal basis by the codification of the labels, Hutu, Tutsi, and Twa. For the first time, an attempt was made to codify these labels. We had had them before in our country, as some of the different identities that Rwandans had. Rwandans had many identities, and these were some of them. Not the primary identities, but they were part of the identities that were present in this country. So under colonialism, these labels were codified. And once you became whatever group you were assigned to, you could not change this label by law. So the ethnicization of public service, ethnicization of education, and the codification of the labels led the infrastructure, the superstructure for genocide later on. This was our experience during the colonial period. Towards the end of the colonial period, in a road towards independence, there were political contestations in our country and different views about how Rwanda would gain independence. The United Nations was involved in this. In fact, a number of commissions were sent by the United Nations to come to Rwanda to see how this country would become independent. But the UN and the government, which was then exercising UN mandate over Rwanda, Belgium, did not see eye to eye on the path to independence. In the 1950s, we began to see the beginnings of ethnic-based political formations, especially 1956, 1957. 1957 saw the birth of a political formation called Parmehutu, MDR Parmehutu. That was then one of the formations. This was the only group that had, the only political formation that had a specific mention of a specific category of Rwandans in its name, Parmehutu. But even among these people at that time, they were still grappling with understanding what this meant. I will just, let me read for you just one of the leaders of this group. I mentioned them because the Parmehutu ideology eventually led this country into what you saw in 1994, the genocide of 1994. But my point is that in 1956, 1957, at the beginning of this, even those who later on became complete racists were still grappling with the whole concept of what it meant to be a Tutsi, or what it meant to be a Hutu, what it meant to be a Twa. So let me read for you what one of the leaders at that time was a man called Baltazar Bichamumpaka. Rwandans here know him. Bichamumpaka was one of the leaders of Parmehutu. But this is what he wrote. He said, "Our sense of Bahutu encompasses all the poor people." This is what he said. This was the man himself. He said, our sense of Bahutu encompasses all the poor people, so that a poor Mututsi is at the same time Muhutu. Let me repeat that. So that a poor Mututsi is at the same time Muhutu. That is Hutu in a social sense. I quote him to show you that even those who at that time were bent on using race and ethnicity as their platform to political power were struggling with the reality that in Rwanda, there were no different races. There were people of different social categories. So that was the Rwandan society towards the end of colonialism. Unfortunately, the political leaders who were bent on using the racial ethnic card with time found out that it paid. So by the 1960s, they had discovered that it paid to play the race card and to introduce, especially if you introduced violence in the mix. Ethnicity and violence paid for them politically. It also paid for them because the Belgian administration at that time also bought into this philosophy and accelerated and radicalized the public sector ethnicization of our society. So in the 1960s, you saw Rwandan politics became a mixture of ethnic politicking with increasing doses of violence. In the 1959, we saw it. The more people killed in the name of a particular group, the easier it became for them to raise politically in Rwandan society. 1959, 1963, 1973. So we saw this becoming normal. In addition to this, the ethnicization of education that had begun during the colonial period increased during the immediate post-colonial period. So schools, universities, higher institutions of learning were reserved for a particular group of people and a particular region later on in the 70s. This is what, unfortunately, Rwandans inherited post-colonial, as a post-colonial political legacy, this legacy was accelerated by the Habyarimana regime after 1973. The ethnic basis of the Rwandan polity became an acquired phenomenon, accepted by certainly the leaders that were, but also their supporters in the international community. They also added in a mix of, as I said, regionalism and violence against the targeted group, the Tutsi. So when 1994 came, we had had decades in which politics in this country was based on divisionism, sectarianism, ethnic sectarianism, and violence against a targeted minority that had then been identified as foreign. So the Tutsis stopped being just a Rwandan minority, but they became a foreign entity politically. And it was easy to move from the foreign, turning them into a foreign entity into subhumans. So we saw it. We saw it in the late 60s. They began to be referred to as cockroaches, snakes. So you moved from citizenship, that group was moved from citizenship to foreignness to subhumans and eventually to extermination. Moderator, I think that is, if you look at the history of our country, as I said, I've ignored nuance, I've ignored some other things, but that is the scheme that led from a growing, unified polity to a divided, violent, genocidal state by the end of the 20th century. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sezibera. I think this is very helpful. It helps us to get into the context of where it all came from. And we understand that Rwandans have played a big role in what happened in 1994. But we also understand that there was an implication of the international community. We heard it from the opening remarks and from what you just shared, Dr. Sezibera. And that brings me to you, Mr. Fode. Can you please share your thoughts on how you think maybe the international community could have acted differently to prevent what happened in Rwanda?
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. And I'm like Dr. Sezibera. I used to say that if protocol was included in our assessment as resident coordinator, I would fail. I'm not very protocol, so allow me just to say that. The second disclosure I want to say is, you know, in Senegal, half of the population is Njai, the other half is Job. So Bakri is not a relative, but it happened to be a friend. So I'm a bit familiar of what he has written, and we used to discuss that. Now, coming to your question, I think Dr. Bizimana has already elaborated on many things, but I would add the following aspect. I think the importance of the Security Council should be highlighted, because we know that, I'm sure High Commissioner Aissatu will talk about that. We know that, and it happened also, I know him. Dr. Gambari was at that time the permanent representative of Nigeria, did support a resolution to increase the number of peacekeepers on the ground. And it did not fly, because we know that we have 5 countries who have vetoes within the Security Council, and whatever is happening should be voted for by the Security Council. Because in the UN, people need to understand that there are 2 types of resolution. The General Assembly resolution is not binding. It's not binding. And yet it is where you have 193, member states. What is binding is the Security Council resolution. So I think number one is really the fact that within the Security Council, we did not have the required call to make sure that we supported well this country. Number two, I think that the UN has learned after that, and I'll come maybe to that later. Number two, I think UN did not really have a clear way of assessing really the information provided. And the early warning system that should be set up in order to understand when you have signals, how you assess signals at the magnitude required for the UN to act, I think was missing as well. Because if I read also, I read the Carlson report, as Dr. Bizimana mentioned, but if you read it, even on the messages that were coming from here to that, there were a lot of, if I may say so, a lot of miscommunication within UN, you know, and even I read in the report that even the former Secretary General was saying that he was not informed on time, so he could not, you know, act on time. Of course, we are not here to do the past again, so this was also something I think we should be aware of. The third I'm seeing is, you know, when you have UN peacekeepers, they still rely on their countries to stay or to go, even though they have the blue helmet. And you know here what happened. Every year I'm with the ambassador of Belgium to commemorate the 10 soldiers. And you ended up having the UN, which do not have by itself soldiers, but rather mobilize countries to have soldiers. When the 10 Belgian soldiers were killed, then they withdrew their forces. So that's also another aspect. Of course, we do know, and the president mentioned it in the 25th Cubuca, that they are making distinction between people who lived up to their principles and values and people who stand for their institution. I must say that here the Senegalese troops remain, and one of the most powerful, you know, testimonies that was also said by His Excellency was for the Captain Baijan, who saved many lives and died, was killed here in Rwanda. So that's also something that UN could be preached. Last 2 points, I think we need to make sure that, and I come to the lesson that UN did learn. I think one thing which is important that the first Deputy Secretary General is from Sweden, Jan Eliasson, mentioned. There is no peace without development. There is no development without peace. But there is neither peace nor development without human rights. When human rights are violated, this is where you should act first and foremost. In Rwanda, the problem that I'm still struggling as a UN civil servant is we did have a resolution on the genocides. It's in 1948. The first resolution was after the Second World War, 1948. In that time also we said, you know, never again. We put forward an outreach program raising awareness with UNESCO, with others. Then we have 1966, the Covenant on the Social and Political Rights. We have 1966, the Covenant on Social Economic Rights. So we did have the framework. We did have the framework to act. The problem I'm faced with is really, I think, let's put it bluntly, as I told you, I'm not really a diplomat. I think this is the power balance. Let's face it. Even the Secretary General cannot act without a resolution from the Security Council, you know. So the power balance is still need to be at least put on this aspect of reflection. So they were, to be really clear about what I am saying, is really, I think that there was signal for the UN, there was framework to act, but the power balance on the UN to act either on chapter 6 or chapter 7 wasn't there, because they were not clearly, again, it was mentioned, in fact, the resolution came to reduce the number up to 270 soldiers, which was, I mean, nothing compared to what we signaled. So I think I will elaborate more on, based on that, what UN did learn as a lessons. But the Secretary General, to end with that, even in this his 2022 message, said it. He said it clearly that the important aspect that UN should say on this is we need to reflect on our failure of international community. But I think that international community is one word, but there is a diversity of actors, and diversity actors lead to diversity of position, and diversity of position leads to UN not always acting on time because of this power discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much for I think this is not going to be for today's debate, but maybe the whole idea of reforming the UN for it to be more effective is something that we need to get into discussion as well. At this moment, vous allez me permettre de me tourner vers l'ambassadeur de France, Monsieur Antoine Onfray. Donc, on est encore sur la question du rôle de la communauté internationale. Et je voulais vous demander de partager justement votre expérience par rapport à différentes enquêtes sur le rôle de la communauté internationale dans le génocide des Tutsis au Rwanda.
Madame la modératrice, messieurs les ministres, je vous entends, ça marche? Non. Ça doit être vert. Ah ok, ça marche, désolé. Mais écoutez, ce que je voudrais, parce que vous me demandez de partager mon expérience, c'est peut-être avant de répondre à proprement parler à votre question, en revenir sur l'expérience que moi j'ai vécue en tant que jeune diplomate de 24 ans, envoyé en Ouganda donc en 1987, sans connaître ce qu'était la région, mais découvrant assez vite qu'il y avait un problème de réfugiés rwandais dans toute la région des Grands Lacs. Et ensuite, étant donc numéro 2 de l'ambassade de France à Kampala à l'époque, j'étais jeune, mais c'était une petite ambassade, j'étais donc aux premières loges, effectivement, au moment de l'offensive du Fonds patriotique rwandais, le 1er octobre, composé pour l'essentiel, comme vous le savez, de réfugiés Tutsis, en Ouganda, mais aussi dans d'autres pays voisins, et qui donc, lassés de ne pas pouvoir revenir au pays, lassés de voir leur citoyenneté complètement déniée, ont décidé un jour de prendre les armes et de mener une offensive éclair pour abattre le régime d'Abiyarimana, je crois que c'était vraiment l'idée, et prendre le pouvoir à Kigali. Malheureusement, à l'époque, et moi c'est ce que j'ai pu constater en étant basé à Kampala, il y a au moins 3 pays, dont un qui a joué un rôle plus important que les autres, c'est la France, qui ont réagi, je dirais, de manière quasi pavlovienne, et qui ont volé au secours du régime d'Abiyarimana. Alors ces 3 pays, c'était la Belgique, effectivement, ancienne puissance coloniale. C'était aussi les forces armées zaïroises de Mobutu. Elles ne sont pas restées très longtemps. Et ça a surtout été la France. Comme vous le savez, le corps expéditionnaire belge est reparti assez vite. Le régiment zaïrois s'est tellement mal comporté, puis je crois que le général Makoko a été arrêté, enfin, c'est tellement mal comporté que même Abiyarimana a voulu qu'il reparte. Et finalement, les seuls qui sont restés durablement, au moins jusqu'en décembre 1993, ça a été les troupes françaises. Donc c'est ce qu'on a appelé l'opération Norois, puisque bien souvent on se focalise sur Turquoise. Turquoise, ça c'est à partir de juin 1994, alors qu'en fait le génocide est déjà consommé. Mais en fait l'intervention militaire française, elle démarre dès le 3 octobre 1990, et c'est quelque chose qui s'appelle Norois. Et en fait Norois, tout simplement, ça met fin à cette offensive.
Norois put an end to the RPF invasion. It stopped it. And Rwigema was the first victim, was the general, a very experienced general. who was killed at the front. He had been in Museveni's army too. So in October 1990, the RPF army was destroyed by the helicopters, Habyarimana's helicopters, and we need to know who was piloting the helicopters. There were other events in Kagera. Then Paul Kagame, who was back then a high-ranking officer in the Ugandan forces, he was at Fort Leavenworth in the United States on a training. He left the United States, came back to Rwanda, Uganda, and Rwanda, and he took command of the RPF, changed the strategy. It started a guerrilla war from the volcanoes, and they surprised Habyarimana and his army. Well, this was a tired regime. It was a corrupt regime with a political system based on that division and the instrumentalization of the ethnic division. Ambassador Sezibera spoke about that. And the regime hang on thanks to Norwa operation and Dami, which was another 30 French soldiers, officers and men with Marine Corps, and this with the Foreign Legion. They were here, and they were competent soldiers, and those soldiers were under instructions by France, a democratic country, which did not stop them from committing very grave mistakes. So those soldiers were sent by under the orders of President Mitterrand, and Habyarimana was an ally that they were to defend. So since 1990 to 1993, they were here. And the problem is that when those soldiers, including Dami, with different officers, were very close to the Rwandan Army High Command, and the relationship between France and Rwanda was very good, and they had defense agreements and military cooperation. So when those soldiers were helping the Rwandan armed forces and the gendarmerie to resist against RPF's attack, there was another political apparatus by the MRND, the ruling party, who was planning the genocide, because we're all here, and most of us bureaucrats, so we know that they were able to kill a million people in 100 days. So well, logistics and bureaucracy and bureaucrats and ideologues who incited people to kill, who prepared them with the radio, etc. So it was a high-intensity genocide. There was a low-intensity genocide that had started way before. Minister Bizimana spoke about Gisozi, persecution against of Tutsis, with the waves of refugees since 59, 63, 73, and it restarted in 1990. So, October 1990, Tutsis became enemies of the state. That's how they were labeled. And there were first massacres in Bigogwe, beginning 1991, massacres in Bugesera in 1992. And then it was a repetition of, it was a rehearsal of what was going to be done in 1994. So if we're not for international community, some countries, including France, we had a defense attaché, General Delanier, who since 1990 had assessed the risks that the France politics in Rwanda, a country where genocide was likely to happen. So he was defending his country and some values, and France is, the land of human rights and UN Security Council members. There were some individuals. General Valère was head of the cooperation mission in Rwanda, who knew the country and who knew the military responsible in Rwanda, leaders in Rwanda, but who was surprised, stunned by what he saw, but he was removed. I was a young junior diplomat, but I was number 2 in Kampala from 87 to April 1991. In May, I went back to France and wrote a report saying we're going the wrong way in Rwanda, and there's a risk that we're moving towards to a catastrophe, that people were able to kill 1 million people in 100 days. And I knew the RPF was determined to win. At the beginning, they had failed. Some of them went back to NRA in Uganda, others went maybe in Burundi, Zaire, in Belgium, what have you. But they said that they had no other choice. I had always said that the RPF will one day take power in Kigali. And I knew that the longer the war took, the more dead we were going to see. I had that experience as a young diplomat of NRA. I knew how the NRA had fought to take power in their Luwero Triangle. I knew what had happened, and in some villages in Luwero and in west of Kampala, towards Masaka, there was a town called Luwero. There was a pyramid of skulls, about maybe 300,000 people killed, civilians. So that was not far from a genocide. It was never labeled as such. But the more the war went on in Rwanda, the more it was obvious that there would be dead people, and the regime kept playing the ethnic card, even though it's not really ethnic groups, as Ambassador Sezibera explained. But in France, there was a small group of people who did not see clearly. They were blinded by the desire for hierarchy to go up their ranks, and they allowed that policy, those politics, to go on with. They was holding the wrong analysis. They were spreading the wrong analysis of the regime, Habyarimana regime. They said it was a democratic regime. They had introduced a multi-party system. Even though the CDR was a racist political party with the Hutu power, but when they spoke about freedom of speech, they said there was the RTLM that was allowed to work, to operate. But they said, well, look at this regime. They're doing a good job. Multipartism, free speech. But the reality was different. It was double standards. It was a democracy of facade. It was the MRND that had become the MRNDD, the National Revolutionary Movement for Development, and they added democracy. But democracy that intended to kill its people, it's everything but not a democracy. But you see the radio, it's called Libre de Mille Collines. That it's a free radio, free to kill its people. You had Kangura newspaper. This was it was a horrible newspaper. So they decided to not see all those elements. And those in France who were ringing the alarm bell, the giving warnings, they were shut down. So I've always thought that if there were not there was no intervention by France, the Habyarimana regime would have fallen. There would have been a a few hundred dead, but it would have fallen. But when there was the UNAMIR, Fode spoke about that. Unfortunately, there was Romeo Dallaire, who did a great job, but he was not ready to face that. But there were the Security Council members. France was very influential. But it was the U.S., a superpower. But the U.S. had suffered a great defeat. It was a debacle in Somalia. So President Clinton did not want to label what happened here genocide because they said there were interethnic massacres. But this was genocide against the Tutsis. But some Hutus in the opposition were killed. You cannot say moderate Hutus. It was Hutu from the opposition. Guillaume Kavaruganda lost his father. And they were against Habyarimana's options. And they were all killed on starting from April 7th. Then the international community was not up to the task, did not take its responsibility. The P5 member who spoke about genocide was Alain Juppé, but he did nothing, like many people in France, because most people did not understand what was going on. So most of French leaders were in bed with the Habyarimana regime. So at some point, the pressure was too much, and then there was Operation Turquoise. Of course, the Turquoise did many things, including very, very bad things, mostly. And the only who saved face of the international community back then is two countries, non-permanent members of the Security Council. That's New Zealand and they called a spade, and they pushed superpowers to intervene. But the reality is that this genocide is documented. It's not the international community that stopped it. It's the RPF that continued its offensive and took control of Kigali, and then ultimately took control of the other zone that had allowed genociders to cross into Zaire with all their weapons, which is a big contrast. So it's Rwandans themselves who put an end to the genocide that was also perpetrated by Rwandans. So it's clear that France and the international community, but France first, allowed a genocide that was preventable to happen. But that genocide had not been planified by French people, but by Rwandans, part of whom were prosecuted in Arusha, others in France now, and others still live in France, and they don't have any problem, and they're not being prosecuted in some countries as well. But this genocide was planned by Rwandans, perpetrated against Rwandans. It's a genocide against Tutsis, but in France, in Rwanda, they said perpetrated against Tutsis, or the genocide of Tutsis. It's a question of language, but that took long. But let me say this: France was long involved in denying the genocide and the France's responsibility, and its position was not really, could not go on, and it became obvious that France could not go on in that denial. We all know what happened here. So there was the declared commission set up by the President of the Republic, and for 2 years they sifted through the archives to identify the responsibility of France in the genocide, and that commission concluded, revealed France's heavy and overwhelming responsibility of France in the genocide. So Duclerc held, of course, with his colleagues, held a conference about the genocide against Tutsis in September at Huye in Rwanda with French and Rwandan, Belgian and American scholars, and the knowledge about this genocide will continue to be revealed and shared. There are many things that were decisive. There are decisive. The fight against denial of the genocide and the denial by states denial as well. So when a genocide is recognized, it's important for the victims, but it's also very important for the state that has a responsibility in that genocide. It grows when this is revealed and acknowledged, and it opens the horizons for the people of that country. And in France, unfortunately, there was nothing done for too long, and now we're making up for lost time. But there have been many procedures, many trials in Paris with in different courts in Paris, and some genocide suspects, including Muhaimana, were prosecuted and sentenced to 14 years in prison. Wikiwaruta, whose trial has been going on for months, and it's a big trial. He was prefect of Gikongoro. Normally, we should have a trial every 6 months. Maybe it's not enough, but this is significant. This is an effort which is both encouraged by the executive, but also the police plays a role in it, and the judiciary plays a role in it. So the French and Rwandan judiciary collaborate on this. But there's what I'm saying is, as France's ambassador here, I need to emphasize those facts. Thank you very much, Honorable Ambassador. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for reiterating those historical facts and talking about France's current commitment to make an effort to acknowledge some facts, which facilitates, as you say, the revitalization of diplomatic relationships and political relationships between Rwanda and France. So we'll be back to justice aspect. Let me move to the High Commissioner Aissatu.
That made efforts to speak out at the UN Security Council, and they talked about the New Zealand, the Czech Republic, but there was also Nigeria. Nigeria was a member of the Security Council then, and there were those debates. The first debate on whether what was happening in Rwanda was a genocide or an ethnic violence. But there was also another debate on whether to reduce the number of peacekeepers in Rwanda. And your permanent representative then, Professor Gambari, Professor Ibrahim Gambari, who was your permanent representative, he warned members of the Security Council that the decision will be catastrophic. He's often recognized for his effort for consistently calling for action, despite the resistance of the most powerful states. We talked about that. In his speech at Kigali Arena on April 7th, to commemorate 27 years after the 1994 genocide of Tutsis in Rwanda, President Paul Kagame made a reference to Professor Gambari and Nigeria, pointing out that Rwanda will never forget their contribution towards stopping the genocide. So, Your Excellency, what do you think are the lessons Nigeria took out of that experience?
Well, in short, I will say our concern to peace and security all over the world, in AU, the whole world, is because of foreign policy objectives, you understand. Nigeria, in its foreign policy objectives, recognizes the promotion of African integration. I'm going to quote directly from our constitution. Promotion of African integration and support for African unity. Promotion of international cooperation for consolidation of universal peace and mutual respect among all nations, and elimination of discrimination in all its manifestations. Respect for international law and treaty obligation, as well as seeking of settlement. Huh? Oh, sorry, I forgot. Respect for international law and treaty obligations, as well as seeking of settlement of international disputes by negotiation, mediation, conciliation, arbitration, and adjudication. This has always been Nigeria's concern. We believe that, all countries, there should be peace in all countries. And that is why we are always at the forefront of peace and security. And that is why you see Nigeria took that action at the UN. That is where we are.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Now I'm going to shift a bit the topic, and we are going to talk international justice. And I'm going to turn to you, Ambassador Walters. There's a need to end impunity by making that all those accused of genocide crimes in Rwanda face justice. As we speak today, Professor Dr. Bizimana said that Rwanda had sent hundreds of indictments, international arrest warrants in many countries worldwide for a number of individuals that are suspected to have committed genocide. Most of these individuals are still fugitives and at large. So what are your views on international justice related to genocide? You may wish to also maybe share some experience from your own country.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and peaceful Kwibuka to everyone. The question you asked me brings us back to a rather fundamental principle in international public law, which by its Latin words goes as aut dedere aut judicare. In other words, either extradite or prosecute. This is in relation to international crimes. Crimes so serious that they shock the conscience of humanity wherever they take place. As Mr. Minister Bizimana already remarked this morning, in 2006, the ICTR came to an important observation in a public notice in the case of Mr. Karemera. It mentioned that the genocide against the Tutsi is a fact of common knowledge beyond legal dispute. Now, this is a bit more than just a few remarks on this particular case, because there are implications to it. And it implies that national and international jurisdictions have the competence to investigate and to prosecute and to judge the cases of the genocide against the Tutsi. And it goes a little bit further, I would say, because states can be expected to investigate, extradite, or prosecute. However, as was already alluded to by the fact you mentioned that so many fugitives are still around without having faced justice, there are many obstacles to the implementation of these principles. Sometimes very practical issues are at play. Judges not being allowed to visit the crime scenes, witnesses living far away abroad, evidence spread in various countries, fair trial concerns, issues of adopted nationality, and many more. So I would like to have a look first towards the first principle, aut dedere, otherwise whether to extradite or not. Countries and governments that consider such extraditions obviously look to the conditions in the state where the extradition should be directed to. In other words, whether there is a functioning justice system. Now, in the case of Rwanda in 1994 and the years thereafter, in the immediate aftermath of the genocide, I think it's fair to call this the emergency phase. The justice system was destroyed during the genocide. I think there were only a handful of lawyers left in the country. There was no administration, there were no courthouses anymore. It had to be built back from scratch, basically. So a lot of training initially of police, of prosecutors, lawyers, and judges was involved. Infrastructure was an issue as well. There were no courthouses. There was an acute lack of prison infrastructure. But progress was made to such an extent that I think it was in the second half of the first decade, the Rwandan government requested the ICRT to extradite certain suspects to be put on trial in Rwanda. And at that point, it was initially declined, citing concerns about fair trial rights and the like. Then a flurry of other reforms was announced and was implemented. The transfer law of 2007 was amended a few years later, which adopted guarantees for fair trial for the accused. It introduced immunity for defense lawyers and counsel, and it introduced witness protection, to name a few. Then a high court chamber for international crimes was established for those extradited. And last but certainly not least, the abolition of the death penalty was a very important decision that the government made. It was not to no avail, as the ICTR started to extradite in 2012, in the Winkindi case it was. And not that much later, or around the same moment in time, I think, the European Court of Human Rights cleared the extradition of a suspect, I think it was from Sweden, the Ahu Rugese case, as it found no ground that the suspect would not receive fair trial. By the way, the Netherlands was at that point in time the only country to intervene in this particular case with the court, as it stated, as it still states, that putting the suspect on trial in the countries where the crimes happened is of the utmost importance. Not only it's there that most of the witnesses are, but also because it shows that justice is done. And this is all not just, I would say, a matter of putting someone behind the bars. It is a matter of helping a society to come to terms with what has happened in the past. And the fact that people are put on trial in the country itself very much serves that purpose. There can be, in our view, no peace without justice. And then, of course, there is the issue of the victims. Victims form a very important group in such trials, and the fact that they see that justice is done is helpful to them personally, but also society at large. From that point on, several countries, including the Netherlands, extradited suspects of genocide to Rwanda. Looking to the numbers, these numbers as compared to the entire list of 1,100 something of suspects is fairly limited. So the main reason behind this is, I would say, that any extradition not only is a very sensitive issue for the country where the crimes took place, but also for the country that actually extradites, as it affects its own justice system and its own interpretation of rule of law within its own country. At the end of the day, it comes down to political decisions. So this is probably going to last longer, and that's not so surprising. In case of the Holocaust, prosecutions took place until, I think, fairly recently, and that is a really long time ago. So let's have a look then at the other element of this Latin phrase, the prosecution, judicare. Can we prosecute easily in our own countries? Or are there certain obstacles as well? Again, relative in the total number of cases which Rwanda seeks to be addressed, there are relatively few prosecutions. So that points to certain difficulties in the system. And I think we should really try and understand these in order to try and to assess those difficulties and improve ourselves on the working of the entire system. There are fairly obvious things. Witnesses and evidence is not located in our country. Usually it's spread over a fairly great number of countries, making it pertinent to liaise with each of these countries individually to seek access to the evidence. And this is usually done on the basis of bilateral agreements for legal assistance, and shouldn't be surprising, but there are many differences in these various bilateral instruments. So a country that prosecutes one person needs to deal with several other countries with instruments that are not identical. Needless to say, that presents an obstacle for the prosecution. So is there any remedy to be found in the international conventions? Regrettably, the Genocide Convention, as well as the Geneva Conventions, are somewhat outdated on the provision of mutual legal assistance. Other more recent instruments, like the UN Treaty on Transnational Overseas Crime, do contain modernized instruments for mutual legal assistance. But again, this is about overseas crime and does not apply to crimes of genocide or other crimes against humanity. The UN General Assembly recognized this serious problem in the international legal system in its resolution 3074 that called for international cooperation in detection and extradition of persons guilty of crimes against humanity. On the basis of that, a number of countries, Argentina, Belgium, Slovenia, Senegal, Mongolia, and also the Netherlands, a few years ago took an initiative to start negotiations for a convention on international cooperation in investigation and prosecution of the crime of genocide. At the moment, I think that about 76 countries have expressed their support for this initiative, and currently texts are being drafted and hopefully at some point in the future may be adopted. It contains very practical issues which aim to improve the efficiency in which this entire system of mutual legal assistance works. It covers areas of witness protection, taking evidence, victim assistance, victim protection, as well as the service of judicial documents. All these tiny steps need to be addressed in order to make the system work in a better and more efficient way. So I know that many of your countries already support this initiative, and for those who don't yet, obviously I would like to seek their support for this important development to address an issue once again, which is of the utmost importance to humanity as large. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, and I believe your call is heard. So now we are going to move to our next round. I believe we still have a few minutes to go. And as I said at the beginning, we will try really to focus more on the future. We went back in the past to understand exactly how we should do things differently to move forward. And for that, again, I'll start off with you, Dr. Sezibera. 28 years after the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, Rwanda is rebuilding itself. And I wanted you to share with the audience what you think are the key lessons that Rwanda had learned from the experience of the genocide as we go on this journey of reconstruction.
Thank you very much. I think the lessons are many, and we are still learning. We have not yet stopped, but I think I'll focus on a few. I think the biggest lesson Rwandans have learned over this period is that the world does not owe us a living. But also in that sense that the world should not determine how and when we die. So yes, it does not owe us a living, and this has been many consequences to us. The programs of self-sufficiency that we have invested in, and the determination to determine our own vision for the future has been informed by this. That yes, we know that the world does not owe us a living, and we determine our own destiny. The second major lesson has been that investment in unity has great returns, and disunity has incredible costs. And therefore, we have spared no effort to invest in this unity of Rwandans, sometimes despite opposition and incomprehension. This is why programs like Ndi Umunyarwanda have been critical in Rwanda's recovery, and will continue to do so. It is easy to find things that divide people, but to invest in those that unify them carries many more returns. And so that has been the second lesson that Rwanda has learned and continues to learn. Investment in national unity also involves understanding the red lines one should not cross, the amber lines, the amber lights, and the red lights. Because as you have heard from the panel, our history has shown us that there were plenty of amber lights to show that genocide would occur in this country. And then the lights turned red, but still people debated, is this red, is this yellow, is this, what is it green? And so our investment in national unity has meant that we clearly, as a country, define what our red lights are, what our amber lights are, and stick to them and explain them. So national unity is number 2. Number 3 has been the need to invest in shared growth and prosperity. Shared growth and prosperity. Because this country grew in the past, but as I explained, it was growth and prosperity that was destined to be shared by just a few people, a small category of people. So shared growth and prosperity has been another key lesson, I think, that we in Rwanda have learned. And you can see that in our economic programs from Vision 2020, now from Vision 2050. There is a need to invest in growth, but not just for growth's sake or prosperity's sake. It has to be shared. And this is clear in everything that we do as a country. And finally, is that we are only as secure and as prosperous as our neighbors are. And therefore, investment in regional integration and even global initiatives that we have taken are informed by this. Rwanda has been a key champion of the responsibility to protect at the global level, working with our partners. Yeah. We have played our role in reforming the principles of peacekeeping through the Kigali principles of peacekeeping operations. All this is informed by the fact that we think we are only as secure and as prosperous as our immediate neighbors, African neighbors, and the global community is. So I think those are the few lessons that we have learned. But as I said, we continue to learn every day.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Sezibera. Indeed, it's a learning process. And one of the objectives, as we said at the beginning, is to make sure that we prevent future genocides. And I'm going again back to you, Fode. After 1994, we've seen so many other crises happening around the world. And we've heard the experience of Rwanda. And my question to you will be, what do you think, in your view, should be the preventive measures to avoid future crises and genocide?
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I think I could divide it into 2 parts. One would be really focusing on the global arena, and the other one on Rwanda, and maybe don't know if we'll have time to come to the other development aspect of the country. But at global level, as Minister Sezibera mentioned, in 2005, we had what we call the responsibility to protect. And the responsibility to protect has 3 pillars. One is the state has the role to protect its civilians and its citizens, because it is a shared responsibility, as it was mentioned also by Ambassador Humphrey. The second pillar is the international community has a role to support and assist any country that do not have the means to continue protecting its population. And the third one, which is the pillar where we say that the international community, when the states fail to protect its population, the international community has the right to intervene. It could be under Chapter 6, where we don't have engagement, military, but under Chapter 7, where we could also have military engagement. So that's number one. This is something that the UN has brought about in 2005 at the outcome document of the General Assembly. The second that was done is we have set up an Under-Secretary General in charge of preventing genocide, and they added now hate speech, because we know that this is where things also, as Dr. Bizimana mentioned, on YouTube and others, but this is where we start also seeing things. So this Under-Secretary General even visited Rwanda in 2021, had very interesting discussion, including with His Excellency the President, where we look about the situation in Bosnia-Herzegovina and Rwanda, how we could also link up in learning lessons, as it was mentioned. The third one was the one that was related to what we call outreach program. The outreach program, as Dr. Bizimana mentioned, was one which was raising awareness and educating and making sure that we learn properly the lesson at the early age as possible, so that we are building new citizens, as Rwanda is trying to do. The Rwanda we want, the new citizen that will really support the nation building. And also how you can support survivors on that. That is also another aspect which was important. The fourth element is that we have seen that in many contexts, of course, it's not always, but we have seen that in many contexts, wars will really, could be a foundation that could lead to genocide. So prevention of war is very important in the agenda of the UN. And that prevention of war also should be grounded on analysis, how you share analysis. And you remember that in many countries we supported that what we call early warning system. That is looking at when you see signals, how do you act on before, as Dr. Sizibera mentioned before. It's too late, because we were seeing things piling up that could lead to genocide. But did we have really the required measures as early warning system to make sure that we act on rightly on time? And that's also an important piece on this aspect of preventing this element. Ending impunity, which is critical, because when people will see that if they are committed crimes, could be war crimes, crimes against humanity, it could be also ethnic cleansing, it could be atrocity, so that you could be trialed and you face judgment on that. That's also something, and you could be sentenced in that. So that's also an aspect that was brought about. Of course, let's be frank. Even if you have the ICC, we know that there are powerful countries that did not sign, so they are involved in those elements, and they cannot be, tried, because they are saying that when it happened, they should be tried in my own country, not by international tribunal. So there is a limitation, as Matthias was also saying, on this aspect of tribunal. Now, the other aspect I do think which is important, and it was based on people who are following this aspect know that what we call the Brahimi report, that Brahimi report, which was issued after the Sri Lanka event that also has seen huge massacres in Sri Lanka. Then UN decided to set what they call rights up front. So in any countries, we need to follow up on the human rights aspect. And I'm glad to say that Rwanda also did follow on that, because Rwanda presented for the third time in 2021 their Universal Periodic Review, where they had 284 recommendations, and Rwanda accepted 160 recommendations. And currently we are partnering in having the roadmap to support implementing the recommendation. Now, last 2 points I want to add, coming to Rwanda now, and I will elaborate more maybe later on the development side. I think that in many countries, what fuels also this aspect of division are, in my humble view, 3 things that are important to pay attention to. One is inequalities, where people are seeing that they are creating wealth, and wealth are among, in the hands of minority. That's something that people no longer accept. Second, which is very important, is when democracy in a broader sense, so the accountability mechanism, the delivery system is not providing what people are needed in education, in health, in protection, That's also enough. Of course, even in holding their institution accountable on what they are meant for, that's also something that people can no longer accept. That is something that could lead, and we have seen it, even if it ended up by coup, what we are seeing now in West Africa. You have in Mali, you have in Guinea, you have in Burkina. People would no longer want to be, governed the way that they used to be, because they are holding their institution accountable. The third element I'm seeing is what Dr. Sezibira mentioned, which in my view is very important, is how do you build peace with your neighbors? How do you build peace at continental level? How do you make sure that multilateralism is supporting peace everywhere? And I want to really commend Rwanda in that part, because they are the 4th largest contributors to UN peacekeeping. The international community failed Rwanda, but yet Rwanda is taking up its role to support peacekeeping in various areas. But that part of the discussion is critical. And that one also comes to how do you make sure that trade, investment, integration are the one that is grounded this neighborhood and this continent. I'll come back to that on the African continental free trade area and other elements. And there also, UN has learned its lesson, because we supported the regional oversight mechanism, which just had the meeting last February in DRC. You were part of, you are the one chairing on the technical side. But I do think that that is yes. On Rwanda, I'll come back to that, because it might require that I develop a bit of that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Now, we're going to ask my panelists to really stick to time, comments that are no more than 2 minutes, so that we give ourselves an opportunity to cover the rest of the questions. So now I'm going to move to you, Ambassador Walters, and still on the issue of prevention of genocide. So I'm going to ask you to share with us your thoughts on the role of education as a preventive mechanism to genocide, but also in the fight against the genocide ideology and denial. Ambassador.
Thank you. Do you hear me? Yeah. Well, obviously, there's an important role for education in relation to these horrific events of genocides as they have taken place in several countries in the world. I think it's important that education recognizes the origins and the causes of such events in all its aspects, whether it's historically or politically or even psychologically. And addresses also the issues which Fode already referred to, which comes next after these events, the reconciliation and the healing. In my view, I think the aim should be to promote fact-based critical analysis among students, to make them more resilient against the information that they may find in their social networks and on social media and what have you. Fact-based analysis that prevent ignorance and misinformation and denial. In the Netherlands, the Holocaust obviously is a traumatic period of our own history, as during those 5 years of occupation, 90% of the Jewish population in our country was murdered. So the Holocaust is part of the curriculum, but teachers are also encouraged to involve other events of genocides in their courses and in their teaching, because it deepens our understanding of the similarities, but certainly also of the differences of these events. And that brings me to a point which Fode referred to, that you seek to promote alertness amongst your students on any indicators or any expressions that may eventually lead to a repetition of these horrific events. These stages and signals can be there, and they need to be recognized by students. There's also another important aspect to education addressing the issue of genocide, which is that it contributes to an understanding of the international law and the role and responsibilities of the international community. Finally, and certainly not least, I would say that it also presents opportunities for students and future officials and others involved in building bridges between our countries to share experience with the countries where similar events have happened. I happened to have been in Rwanda at the second half of 1994, early 95, and I also happened to be in Iraq not long after the genocidal events against the Yazidi communities, and it struck me how important it could be for that community to learn from a country of Rwanda how it addressed its traumatic experience, because after such events have happened, populations tend to be so traumatized and focused on their own situation, and to give a new perspective on a brighter future, it's important to relate to other countries where similar issues have occurred. Finally, in education, it's important to discuss the ways how we can achieve reconciliation within society. And that can take a long time when it's not addressed properly. In the Netherlands, we do have such experience as well, because the Holocaust not only raised questions with respect to the occupation, but also the way how our own society reacted to that. And we were probably not alert to that at that time. Reconciliation is an important topic that needs to be addressed from the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for sharing your thoughts on that. And I think it's very important to invest more in unity and reconciliation. Based on that, I'm coming to you, Ambassador Aishatu. And we often talk about women as victims in conflicts during the genocide in Rwanda, the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. There are horror that happened in this country for women. But for the sake of this panel, I wanted to share your experiences on the role of women in conflict prevention, but also in building unity and reconciliation.
Well, I will say the role of women in conflict resolution, promotion of unity, reconciliation, and building a peaceful world is undeniable. As women, we are naturally considerate, sympathetic, empathic, compassionate, and motherly. These virtues guide our relations and direct our actions and make it difficult for us to embark on actions that are detrimental to humanity. In conflicts, women and children are the most affected. Drawing from this position, women are very unlikely to support violence. They are more likely to work towards resolution of conflicts. Studies have shown that the higher levels of gender equality are associated with lower propensity for conflict. In the same vein, I believe women play significant roles in society to promote peace. As mothers, we demonstrate love to promote humanity and make for functional society. And as educators, we imbibe values that engender mutual respect and right living. As mediators, we seek for innovative measures, alternative conflict resolution mechanism to promote peace and peaceful cohabitation. Our role is very enormous, the women's role. That's what I think.
Yeah, sure. Yes, I can see ladies in the room are clapping for you, so they probably agree with what you said. Alors, Monsieur l'ambassadeur, en fait, je reviens vers vous. Et c'est une discussion qu'on a commencé un peu plus tôt. Donc, parmi les mesures préventives, il y a aussi la nécessité de
thing to say about prevention and also accountability for the perpetrators, but also for those who didn't do what they needed to do. So what are the challenges? In your view, what further steps should we take so that these people living abroad can be brought to trial? Well, you see, the first problem is that the historical truth is slow in coming. You see what happened between Rwanda and France? It wasn't clear. So, for example, obviously there are French people, researchers, journalists, NGOs who understand. But it is the official France and official Rwanda that have not always shared the narrative. This is the first thing. We have to understand things in the same way. For example, the chronology. Which fact led to what? We have to understand these things have the same understanding, and we need historians, we need archives, but also journalists and communicators, but we also need judges and legal people so that these things are clearly understood so that we have the same understanding. And then, of course, the police and, the prosecutors. For example, we have in France an office where you have 60 policemen who are really investigators, but also in Libya, Iraq, and Ukraine when the process begins, everywhere. So this is important so that we have a core of investigators and police people, security people who have the right training to find, for example, when, I am not a specialist, of course, in the penal code and criminal justice, but you see there are contradictory testimonies among the witnesses. Sometimes people forget, or they don't have the same memory, or something happened to their memory because of various factors. So there are people where you have contradictory testimonies, incoherent testimonies. And then, of course, you have people who are, cases that are, practically thrown out of court. But it is, so we have to train the investigators to know how to collect information and data and testimonies from people, on something that happened 20 years ago. For example, I take also Agat Habjariman. Well, you can take her to court, but then the file is not good. You haven't done your research properly. There are no investigation, and then the case is just thrown out of court. It doesn't mean that she's innocent. It just that there isn't enough material to either condemn her or condemn her. Because in French law, if there is a doubt, then the suspect benefits from that. Agathe Habyarimana, everybody knows her role, her brothers. We know, but where is the evidence? It's not written. We don't have proof. We don't have, some concrete proof. So it's very difficult. These things can be found. Evidence can be found in her case or others like that. But it takes time and it takes skills. We don't always have people who are properly skilled. Minister Bizimana mentioned it. He said that Rwandans abroad are very divided. The Rwandan communities, on Rwanda, you may not know. You may not be aware, but these people are very, very divided. So it's very difficult to get a common message. Second, also, a lot of this genocide denial that was mentioned and so on, happens in Kinyarwanda on social medias. And the people of the countries where those people live, were Germany or Sweden or Belgium, USA, Canada, and so on, it's very difficult to know, for those countries to know what are these people saying, or which can influence things. But also, for example, Germany, Netherlands, Sweden have already extradited suspects, but others haven't begun. So there is also this effort, and it's all against impunity. But also you have to understand that human justice is sometimes slow, imperfect, not always efficient. But this is the best we can do. Justice is the best we can do for the victims. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your thoughts. I think maybe we've run out of time, but there are a few minutes where maybe we can ask one or two people to say a word.
Last round of question with you, Dr. Sezibera. President Kagame once said, and I quote, "We are prepared that what happened here should never happen again, not only in Rwanda, but anywhere in the world. Our never again means never again." Now, as a member of the international community, what has Rwanda done or is doing to prevent similar occurrences anywhere else in the world?
Well, Rwanda has been active and has done what she can do, given the international architecture, I think, which Ambassador Forde talked about. Clearly there is need for a conversation which has been ongoing about how to deal with the power issues that were raised here on this panel, that those who are strong, how can they listen better to those who are considered weak? Yeah. In Rwanda, we don't consider ourselves strong, neither do we consider ourselves weak. We are just dignified. And so how do you listen to those who are dignified and those who have something to say? And given these constraints, Rwanda has been very active in participation in discussions around the architecture of the world. In peacekeeping, I think I mentioned the discussions we hosted here around peacekeeping, Kigali, the Kigali principles on peacekeeping. Of course, there's been there are challenges of mandates, chapter 6, chapter 7. Now I think we have chapter 8. There is chapter 6.5. I'm sure there is also chapter 7.5 or something. You can all discuss mandates, but there are things which are practical that can be done even within the current mandates to protect citizens. And this is what Rwanda has been doing. Citizens in conflict. If you turn your sight onto the citizens, civilians in conflict, then you can protect them within any mandate. I think it's been mentioned here. Captain Diagne has been mentioned here, what he did in this country under very bad mandate with few forces. Yeah? General Nyedoho was here, was the deputy force commander from Ghana, and he kept the Ghanaian contingent here. Even when everybody else was pulling out their troops, he decided to keep the contingent here. And they did what they could to save people. So Rwanda is an important contributor to UN peacekeeping missions, but it's beyond the numbers. It's also the quality of that peacekeeping that we emphasize on. Where Rwandan troops are deployed in Central African Republic, we've been to Haiti, we've been to Mozambique now. We are in Darfur. Wherever Rwandan troops go, their focus is on civilian protection. And irrespective of the mandate, they've been able to do this. So I think this is something that we need to keep talking to our colleagues at the global level to see how the quality. Currently, peacekeeping is about force protection. When countries send their troops into theaters to keep the peace, their main concern is how they can protect their forces. And our argument has been, but no, if you are going to send troops to a war zone, if you want to protect your forces, keep them at home. But you cannot put troops into a war zone and then say that the only thing they want to do is protect themselves. Force protection is important, but even more important is civilian protection. So that is a discussion that should be ongoing, and Rwanda has walked the talk. We would hope that this can also be done. The second has been like I said, working with our neighbors in regional integration. Integration has been critical, African and the African Union, even at the global level. We believe in multilateralism strongly. But again, it's the quality of that multilateralism that is important. What are we integrating for? Our focus has always been on the people. Yeah. That is why on the African continent, we've been very active, not only in promoting free trade, but also the free movement of people. Yeah. As President Kagame used to say, and continues to say, if you are an African, you cannot love Africa and hate Africans. It doesn't make sense. Yeah. So our focus still there is on the people, and Rwanda has been very active in the integration agenda. And finally, is the whole area of the reflection around justice. Justice after mass atrocities. Because it's different. A country's domestic justice system cannot simply be transformed into a global justice system. No. Because after mass atrocity, there is the imperative for justice, but there is also the imperative for reconciliation, rebuilding, reconstruction. So it must be the justice that promotes broader policy objectives than just punishment. And we have been talking to our colleagues to say, look, it's okay to have global justice, but what kind of justice do you want? Is it the kind of justice that promotes, that punishes, but also promotes rebuilding and reconciliation in these societies? We had these discussions around the ICTR when it was being set up, but also as the world was grappling with helping Sierra Leone recover from their violent past, and we will continue to do that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. So, Fode, your preferred subject, Rwanda's development journey. How do you assess the role of the international community in that?
Thank you very much. I can talk about my own experience as a co-chair, a permanent co-chair for the last 5 years of the development partners here in Rwanda. One, I'm seeing, first, this country has really a very clear leadership and shared vision on where they are heading. And that's a conducive environment for partnership. Second, we as partners, we are considered in an open discussion with a clear architecture of development here in Rwanda. Rwanda has one of the best. I have been to many African countries, but they have the best, if not one of the best, architecture development in Africa. With the sector working group, with, I don't want to dig into that, development partner coordination group, the development partner retreat. But above all, they are serious about that. When we have a meeting to be held, it is timely and we know and documents are prepared and discussed. And that's very important. And they are totally aligned with Paris Agenda, Accra, and Busan, which is looking at 4 important aspects. One is ownership. I always say to my colleague, we have not been elected or nominated to run a given country. And the ownership is important. They know their development agenda. We are here to support and discuss. Focus on results. Your IMIHIGO performance contract, how you really be accountable on the results that you did to deliver on that. Third, reduce transaction cost. Wherever it is possible to move through the national system that we contribute also to support building, this is the way to go. Third, it is extended partnership. What I mean by that, you have a very strong, they moved from aid policy to cooperation policy, which means a lot. Because in the early 2000s, contribution on the budget was about 50 to 60% from development partners. Now the last donor performance assessment we are seeing that the country is moving on mobilizing domestic resources. And that's very critical on sustainability. Now, what we are doing together before not taking too much of the time. First, based on this really conducive environment, as development partners, we focus on elements that have a leverage effect on leading to the ambitious program of this country. One is human capital. You cannot move without human capital. So we support on the knowledge, on the TVET, on the stunting, on the education, and these are important in supporting young people, as it was mentioned, having access to jobs, because the NST1, the National Strategy for Transformation, is looking at 1.5 million jobs, off-farm jobs to be created. The second, we look at innovation. How do you support this country? Leapfrogging. We have the fourth industrial revolution. How do we support the country better position in leapfrogging and building innovation? The third that we are doing is how do you support building strong institutions that can deliver services? You have seen COVID-19. Rwanda was prepared, but with all our support, we managed to build a strong health system. And Rwanda is among the only 5 African countries that met the target of 30% vaccinated in December, and I'm sure that they will meet the 70% in July. And even you are moving now towards IRM manufacturing with the support of development partners. We look at regional integration, the African Continental Free Trade Area, how we support the country readiness in making sure that this 1.2 billion market, Africa intra-trade is only 18%. And yet Europe intra-trade is 69%. It is a possibility that if we get it right, as Dr. Sezibera was saying, we can unlock 35 trillion of GDP. That is important for Africa to leapfrog and move forward. Fourth, that I'm seeing which is important that we are doing together, we are doing joint analysis. That's critical data. You have the census, you cannot plan anything if you don't have data and on-time data, and that's also an area in which we are working together with the government. Now we have the midterm review that is coming of the NST1, and we are supporting also. Fifth, this is the financing. I think the last donor performance assessment by Minecofin mentioned that the external finance now is about 1.4 billion USD, which is important. But the same report mentioned that remittances is 334 million. So remittances has doubled, 174 in 2013 to 324. That is showing also an area where we are working together to support how you unlock the diaspora involvement and remittances on that matter. That's also an area that we think is important. Last point, because I have so many things to say, but we need to be mindful of the time. I think if you look at Rwanda, I'm very proud, really, of what this country has achieved, seeing what was done before. GDP per capita moved from 126 USD in 1994 to 787 now, almost 7 times. 80% of the health system was collapsing. Now you see, I mentioned this COVID-1. The education, between 95,000 up to 150,000 children in Rwanda after the genocide were without parents. Now we have net enrollment in education, 98% for girls and 97.6% for boys. Gender, I don't need to mention it. It was mentioned. Even for refugees. You had at that time 2 million refugees, but even for refugees, Rwanda has signed off on the CRF, which is helping refugees and sustainable solution. So what the minister was saying is not only on the peace, on the quality, and Rwanda pioneered the SDG 16 on peace, strong institution, and inclusive society. I want just to end, Madam Moderator, by saying that my colleagues are here. They are ready to continue this strong partnership. It's unfinished business, and we know that we are living in an era that we call VUCA, vulnerabilities, uncertainties, complexities, and ambiguities. We have COVID, we have conflict, we have climate change. All these are challenges that we are ready to tackle together because we know the environment is conducive. You have a great leadership, you are committed, and we are committed to deliver us together for the benefits of the people in Rwanda, leaving no one behind. That's my call to all the colleagues on this Kwibuka 28. Minister, I have just one element I want to call on you on that. I think there are two areas I do think we need really to look at. One is on hate speech, the strategy on hate speech and starting early. The second is genocide African scholar, that is that Dr. Neritu is spearheading to support that one. And I think if we have this one every year, this colloque, but prepared, bringing in academia, scholars, young people, children, other countries that face the same thing, I think it could be considered as a Kigali conference on supporting peace, security, and fighting against genocide and looking at the remarkable development trajectory of this country. You have shown the way. Let's make sure that we follow all the ways and make the continent bright and change the narrative of this continent from war to peace and development. We can do it. We should do it. You have our commitment as development partners.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Fode, and I see Minister is taking notes, so, and you have more time to talk during lunch, so we are heading towards the end. Et je me dirige encore une fois vers vous, Monsieur l'ambassadeur en vrai. Monsieur l'ambassadeur, 28 ans après le génocide perpétré contre les Tutsis, le Rwanda a fait des progrès significatifs dans sa reconstruction, comme vous l'avez entendu. Alors, les récents engagements de la France avec le Rwanda indiquent un nouvel élan dans la poursuite de la relation bilatérale et multilatérale.
In bilateral relations. So, what are the opportunities that we see through those opportunities, through those commitments? I think those opportunities are shared by both countries and the region. I usually present Rwanda to French business people, telling them it's a small country but with huge ambitions. So among those ambitions, we have the one of becoming a logistics hub between East Africa and Central Africa. You see that airport that will be completed in Bugesera together with Qatar. It will have a very modern airport. There are the opportunities offered by regional integration. It's true that EAC is among the most performing sub-regional organizations. It has potential. The DRC was welcomed within the community recently, so there's no doubt that creates another opportunity for Rwanda as a hinterland. Rwanda is at the heart of all this, and in that context, the plurilingualism that Rwanda masters is a real opportunity. Rwanda, of course, they speak in Rwanda. It's a common language for everyone, but you have other languages, English and French, which, though it has diminished, but it's spoken by a large percentage of Rwandans. So if you have that regional integration with your two Francophone neighbors, Burundi and the DRC, the fact that Rwanda maintains French, that's important. So in a nutshell, France is trying to come back on stage in Rwanda with President Macron's visit So based on acknowledging a common history and France's responsibility, that was crucial. And then we can build the future together, having come to terms with our past. There is a cooperation with the French, teaching French in schools. There are doctors who are trained in France, and that is going to continue. And like I said, Rwanda has many ambitions in transport and finance, in international conferences and sports. This is emblematic, of course. The World Cyclist Championship in 2025. This will be a first on the African continent. So I think this is due to the fact that the Tour du Rwanda as the French Franco-Rwandan initiative launched in 2019, has been very performing and very productive regionally and internationally. So it's on this cyclism calendar. And this is a major event on this among sports events in Rwanda. And that Tour du Rwanda is a young Franco-Rwandan venture with 15 French people who come here annually. They know Rwanda and they organize that tournament with Rwandans here in Rwanda. So back to your question, Rwanda needs more partners, not just France. There's room for everybody here. And Rwanda is being sought after by many people, many partners. And this remains a young country with a quality administration, though there are people you meet quite often, which is the case in the on the business environment. So the country needs to expand its networks. And of course, it's been said inequality is need to reduce. And it's clear that Rwanda is working on it, and it has the means to realize its ambitions, to achieve its ambitions. Thank you very much, Your Excellence. We're moving towards the end of our conversation.
Our panelists, if you allow just a few seconds, 30 seconds each, just for your final thoughts before you conclude. And I'll start with you, Ambassador Aishatu. Just a few thoughts before we go. 30 seconds.
20 seconds?
Yes.
Okay. Well, Rwanda has come a long way, you know, from the genocide, and they're doing very well. And Africa should continue to unite and speak against all these atrocities and get united to do more for ourselves, you know. I remember when similar things were happening in West Africa. You remember the ECOMOG took charge of Sierra Leone and Liberia. I wish there was something like that in this region when this was happening to save our brothers and sisters. But all is well now, and I hope we will achieve more.
Thank you. Ambassador Walters?
After all those eloquent words, it's hard to add something. But as you may know, the Netherlands and Rwanda are embarking on a third phase in their relationship. The first phase was more or less determined by humanitarian aid, then came development cooperation, and now we are moving towards a relationship based on trade and investment between equals. And if you had asked me 27, 28 years ago, when I first came to the country, whether I would be discussing these things here at this point, I would have doubted my own senses, whether that would have been possible. The fact that it is possible, and that there are very serious undertakings on the Rwandan government to allow private sector to grow, and recognizing the potential the private sector has of offering solutions in a better, quicker, and more efficient way than often government agencies can, is, that's truly quite heartening. That's not to say that it will be a smooth ride. There are still many obstacles on the road, especially in terms of the way how the change of added value, the market change do work. There, just the other day, I ran into the difficulties that the country is able to produce more of certain agricultural commodities, but how to get them out of the country is still to be resolved. A second topic, which was already mentioned by Ambassador Sezibera, is that growth has to be shared, especially in this phase where still the large majority of the population earns its income in agriculture. That should not be forgotten, and policy should be able to accommodate their needs. And a third observation from my side is occasionally I find the way how things work defined very much by hierarchy, and a more integrated policy approaches between government agencies and others would, in certain areas, for instance, the water sector, in our view, be very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ambassadeur Onfray, un mot de clôture, 30 secondes.
Bon, écoutez, je vais être très court. Non, écoutez, je crois que le Rwanda fournit la preuve qu'une renaissance est possible, même quand on a connu le pire. Donc, quelque part, c'est un pays qui délivre un message d'espoir au monde entier. Mais cette renaissance, elle suppose une volonté...
requires political will by leadership internally, and also understanding on behalf of the international community, founded on historical truth and facts, and the will to be just to social and economic justice. And those are undeniably the challenges that Rwanda has met and is going to have to meet over the next decades. So for people who came here before 1994, today Kigali is totally new. It's like night and day. Thank you, Your Excellency.
Mr. Fodendiaye.
Merci, Excellence Shakila. I think that Rwanda is a living example of how great leadership, effective governance can translate hope over hatred into reality. Now, I think we could continue, and even on the poverty, as they mentioned, the poverty was 77% at that time, and they moved to 38.2%. So they managed even on the poverty to do something. But from that end, the growth still need to be more inclusive, because we did not really have a very significant reduction of poverty on that. My take is, and I will end with that, in a country where you have 70% of the population below 35, our strongest bet would be on youth and women. And that's what the leadership of this country has chosen to do. Private sector being the driving seat on this NST1, social, economic, and governance, transformational governance. I'm sure that the future is bright for everyone, and you can continue. Our partnership will be continued in order to support inclusive growth, to focus on critical things that are leveraging the potential of this country. And that's what I can say, that it will be the testimony of building hope and making sure that every single Rwandan has its place here, including the diaspora that have a role to play, including our convening power to attract more private investment, because the landscape of financing is changing also in Rwanda. Bilateral are having less, multilateral is increasing as countries are coming in, FDI, foreign direct investment, is playing an important role. That's why the integrated national financing framework would be critical in putting forward the resources to implement the 40 billion US dollars NST1 for the benefits of the people in Rwanda, focusing on youth, women, and private sector, and a critical cooperation among all of us in a regional integration. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Sezibera, your closing thoughts.
Well, I think I can only say President Kagame has said that the journey we've embarked on rebuilding Rwanda after the genocide is not a journey for the faint-hearted. I want to thank our partners who've been with us on this journey. I am sure it has also required of them not to be faint-hearted, within their own bureaucracies, within their own countries, within their own interactions. And so I want to thank them for having joined us on this journey. And I invite them to continue with us. It's not a journey for the faint-hearted, but it's a journey worth walking. And I hope that you will continue to be satisfied as we work together in rebuilding this country. And secondly, finally, rebuilding this country is a work that continues. But those who committed this genocide here in this country have also not rested. And their work also continues, unfortunately. Most of them, fortunately for us, but unfortunately for maybe in some ways, most of them are outside Rwanda, the physical borders of Rwanda now. Many are found in the countries in your countries. They've adapted to modern technologies, and Minister Bizimana talked about it. I would hope that you will join with us in denying them a platform for hatred, not a platform for sharing views, no, but in denying them a platform for promoting hate, exclusion, and genocide. And instead, encourage them, as Ambassador Fode was talking about, to continue to contribute to the rebuilding of Rwanda, because they are an incredibly important resource as Rwandans living abroad. But we need to bring them together with the rest of Rwandans in this journey of rebuilding, which is not for the faint-hearted. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Sezibera. And on this note, may I ask you all to join me in thanking this fantastic panel. Thank you so much, dear panelists. And now I will hand over to the MC for the rest of the program. Thank you.
Thank you, moderator.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our conversation today. Me too. I thank the panelists for a very insightful discussion around the contribution of the international community to Rwanda's post-genocide development journey, which was highlighted very well. Thank you for your thoughts and strengthening collaboration towards the fight against genocide ideology and denial. Let me, at this stage, thank your excellencies for honoring the victim of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi by your presence today. I thank you very much. We have come to the end of our session today. Thank you for coming. I now invite you for lunch. Lunch will be served in the main hotel restaurant. You'll be guided by protocol as you exit the room. Thank you. Good afternoon.
15 irashize twibuka abazize jenoside twabuze abana ababyeyi abavandimwe tubura n'inshuti bose bazira uko bavutse batulekede enaku n'obulumi bamulekwa ne bannamwandu Katonda abawe emirembe mu bujuvu twarakanzwe n'ubwicanyi twakiriwe ikiremwa muntu tuzogwanya ikintu cyose cy'iyonyabwoko hegome no kwiyamiriza imigambi ya jenoside mbega bishwe bose boba bazize iki harageze ko abantu bareka agatima k'ubunyamaswa
Never, never, never again. Let us keep alive the memory of genocide. Never, never, never again. Genocide against humanity. Never, never. Never, never, never again.
Never again. Tunakataa wanaosema mauaji hayakuwepo na hayatarudi kuwepo tena. Never again will we agree. No, 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 no. Sisi vijana kamwe hatutaki mauaji ya kimbari. Abarokotse nimuhumure, hari impamvu mwasigaye.
Gucika kw'icumu nikemeza ko mugomba kubaho.
Abacu bagiye heza bicaye ijabiro kwa jambo.
Tuzahora tubibuka, tuzahora turwanya ikibi.